I think we're live 30 seconds early. So it looks like Ryan posted a couple of questions, which I'll post later. Looks like nobody's here. Now one person is here. Tell us who you are before we start recording. And also, are you watching on Facebook or YouTube or LinkedIn? Curious. And hopefully we'll get a few other people to join us. Deb, thanks you. All right, you're a stalwart. So when we've got someone else, Deb's in from Iowa, I'm sure. We got 3 people now. So we'll start here in just a minute. I'll start. Anne's viewing this from Facebook. And maybe we're already recording. I thought I would go live before we're recording, but I think we're recording. So welcome, Anne and Deb and Ryan. Thank you for posting. Oh, Allison, also on Facebook. She's a local here in Utah. Do you like to be called a local, Allison? Because I know you're from Tennessee, I think. But you're a Utah now. So anyway, glad to have you all here. A few days ago, what I thought I would first do is mention the live stream. Oh, did I close it? I closed it. That President Beasy, Stacey Cram, and some other people, I know Carla Long, Ron Harmon, and I know there were 2 other people, and I'm sorry I don't remember their names. I should have written them down. But anyway, it was pretty interesting. Number one, I think if the situations had been reversed, Community of Christ had somehow bought some LDS properties, that the LDS Church wouldn't have been as open to a Q&A to just anyone. And so I really commend the Community of Christ for their openness and their willingness to talk about this. I know it's a very hard, difficult time still for the Community of Christ. And so I appreciate them for going on and discussing this decision. I know one of the comments I got last week, oh, thank you, Deb. Scott Murphy and Jen Pilkak was the moderator. And the other was a member of the presiding Bishop Rick, and I can't remember that name either. Okay, so I don't know them as well. That's why I didn't remember their names. But, I need a drink here. Just one second. I thought it was pretty amazing. Number one, it was kind of cool because in the LDS Church, everybody would have had buttoned up ties and white shirts and jackets. And so it was nice. I know the men open collar. I mean, they were still dress shirts and sport coats and that sort of a thing, but it was just a little bit more relaxed. And so it was fun to see them sit down and take the hard questions. Hello from Germany, Schwalbera. That must be 2 names timed together, but thank you. I'm glad to have somebody from Germany. That's awesome. So anyway, somebody had posted on one of my videos, hey, Community of Christ believes in common consent. How could they sell these properties without consulting the membership? And so that was the very first question that President Veazey addressed. Sweden too. We are international. Welcome, Summer Lake. Good to see you. And so I just wanted to read. I was trying to take really good notes, which I did for President Veazey. And the first, well, and I don't know if this was the first thing, but I put it in there. The sale was for almost $200 million, $192.5 million for the Kirtland Temple, the and the properties in Nauvoo, and then the historical documents and photographs and paintings and things like that. And I'm going to show a few of those coming up here soon. So, but that was the first question, was why didn't you consult the memberships before you did this? And so he had three main points to this. And the first one I didn't quite understand. I think I did. But he said asking the entire church to meet in a world conference to decide to sell or not to sell was, quote, out of order. Now, I know their world conference has a lot of debate rules and things like that. And so I know he was referring to that. But and I think the next 2 points kind of explain what out of order means. But basically, it wasn't realistic to put that up before the world church. Point number 2 that he made was projected budget reductions had already occurred, and the impact was going to be catastrophic. And that was the word we used, was catastrophic. It had to happen now to avoid a worst case scenario. And the point number 3, if they had brought this up for a church-wide dialogue, it would have weakened negotiations and resulted in a lower price. And so they felt like it's common for these uncommon transactions of historic buildings for confidentiality. And they felt like by keeping the negotiations secret, they could negotiate a better price, and they got the best price that they could. And so I want to cover a few other points that President Vesey spoke about. He said the community of Christ seeks transparency when possible. Common consent is part of who we are, but in some situations, this level of transparency and collaboration is not possible. World Conference leaders have to do the job that the World Conference sustained them to do, and to act in the best interests of the church. The presiding bishopric has responsibility of church assets, and so that's why the presiding bishopric was there. I know Carla Long is part of that. She used to live here in Salt Lake, so I'm kind of familiar with her. But he said a World Conference resolution to sell or not to sell would be, quote, out of order. Many have acknowledged the right to make the sale, many church members, but they wondered why didn't the church leadership seek more information from the church to sell? Because like I said, many Community of Christ members are still really devastated by this loss of those historic buildings. So President Vesey said, based on budget reductions, they're already operating below minimum operating levels. The current budget cuts have already affected ministers to field. It's slowed response times. They've reduced resources to support congregations. And if further budget cuts had occurred, it would be even a bigger negative impact for the church mission. And once again, he called it catastrophic. So as the presiding bishopric has explained, 2025 would have been a 30% reduction of the church's $15 million budget and so that would mean a reduction from 15 million to 10 million. There's no way to increase efficiency and reduce expenses. Entire teams would have been eliminated. buildings would have been shuttered to achieve the reductions. And so they felt like they had to sell now to avoid further reductions. And I will also add that this $200 million sale really is only going to make a difference through 2030. So that's just 6 years away. And they're going to continue to have to make these tough decisions if, current trends continue. So President Vesey said, through council with World Conference leaders, they discussed surveying the church for conversations about the level of support. In this case, it was determined that public discussions were not in the best interest of the church. And he pointed out 3 more reasons for this. So to start conversations with the buyer, all participants agreed to strict confidentiality. And this is a standard practice in major transactions. And so they were really limited as to what they could say without violating the agreement. So let's see here. My next note is a little hard for me to understand. They would have liked to have led the global church in a discernment, and common consent takes multiple international gatherings. They're going to need to translate and present, and they're going to incur additional costs, which is going to create major barriers just for this transaction. So a public presentation would put the church at a disadvantage in negotiations, and it would have given more power to the buyer, which in this case was the LDS Church. So leaders were aware of opinions throughout the worldwide church of selling. The full range of opinions were represented in the council, and after extensive discussions, unanimous decision was made to proceed with the sale now. So he said, contrary to some opinions, I think on social media, but I'm not sure, there really was only one potential buyer with the assets to purchase the package that they negotiated. The world leaders tried other ideas, including a consortium of buyers, but that just wasn't viable. One of the strengths in negotiation was the publicly announced plan to fund retirements. And so by keeping this confidential, it was a strength in negotiations that the church could walk away and not complete the sale. However, if the conference support had been provided, this would have made walking away an empty threat. And so, once again, that was the reason why they kept negotiation secret from the world church. So due to negotiation ramifications and too much public conversation, there was a need to proceed while the plan to retirements, and there was only one way to proceed. And then President Vesey asked, was it right, given the complexities of the transaction and the situation it was? The decision to have the capacity to pursue mission priorities, the decision could not be delayed. So related to the decision to sell, the sites were not available to the church or the public, but they did negotiate several provisions. One is that the Kirtland Temple and the Nauvoo properties would be operated as public historic sites open to all. Community of Christ visitors can visit anytime they are open, and the Community of Christ secured 6 exclusive opportunities per year for Community of Christ group activities, and that's more than typical in transactions like this. And so at that point, he turned it over to some other people. There was one question which he answered right there. Are there other negotiations happening right now regarding other church properties and buildings? And President Veazey said there were none at this time. So I think I've gotten a few. Summer Lake, or maybe I'll just put this up here really quick. Summer Lake heard that the $200 million was not the full sum they got. They almost certainly received private donations from wealthy members, so the total sum was multiples higher. Had not heard that, so I don't know if that's true or not, but that's interesting. I didn't write a lot of notes after President Veazey. Ron Harmon, I believe, is he the presiding bishop, Rick? Bishop? I'm not sure. But anyway, he talked about some of the future things they have going on. There's a development called the North Point development. The sale was announced in 2021 in Jackson County. I'm not super familiar with that, but the proceeds from that sale will help grow endowments, and it's going to slow the gap between income and expenses for 5 years, assuming its current trends continue. So I did ask a question, which I was happy was answered. Stacy Cram answered it, the incoming prophet president for the Church of the Community of Christ. And my understanding, I'd heard a rumor that Stacy basically confirmed that this agreement to keep sites open to the public as they are is for 15 years. Beyond that, there's no agreement, so I don't know what's going to happen there, and nobody knows. So Deb said that Ron Harmon was the presiding bishop, so thank you, Deb, for pointing that out. I did ask a second question because I've heard that Graceland University has been struggling. I've heard through the grapevine that they have actually started spending their endowment, which is, according to the source that told me this, that's kind of a death knell. I don't know if you guys saw my Michael Austin interview. He's the provost at Snow College now. He just left his previous private college because that college was a private college and struggling financially. A lot of these smaller colleges like Graceland and small private colleges, with the way demographic trends are in higher education, there's probably going to be a lot of private college closings because they're having a struggle, and Graceland is no different. Stacy did say that in answer to Graceland, they're struggling, but as far as the operations, that's up to the board of trustees, and so they would be able to better answer that. But yes, they are struggling. And so I think it was just really surprising to me. $200 million sounds like a lot of money to me, and I think to most people. It was interesting to me that President Veazey was so open to say, we've got a $15 million operating budget, and this sale of the Kirtland Temple and the Nauvoo properties is only going to help us on our current spending trajectory until 2030. That's just 6 years away. So hopefully I think I mentioned this last week in the live stream, a lot of people complain about the LDS Church and the emphasis on tithing, uh, that it's a temple recommend requirement and that sort of a thing. But that's the sort of thing that has kept the LDS Church afloat. And so I think it's important for members of the community of Christ that don't want to see a further erosion. I think I mentioned last week 70% of tithe payers are over age 65 and 3% are under age 40. And that's why this sale was necessary. Stacy Cram did mention in her comments that they've been saying, she said, I feel like we've been screaming that, the sale of historic buildings were under consideration for a long time. And people were saying, well, please don't talk about money. We don't want to talk about that. And so that's why the buildings were sold. So it's a tough situation. I feel badly for my community of Christ friends who have lost such priceless treasures. You got to put a price on them sometime. But anyway, I'm going to, since Ryan, I don't know if he's on right now, he posted this question last night, but I think it's not a goofy question. He said, maybe a goofy question, but does the Community of Christ have digital copies of the documents it's sold, or are all of these documents already out in the public? It's a good question, and I'm not totally sure on the answer. I know there's kind of a similar question in the LDS Church. A lot of conspiracy theorists have been like, oh, the LDS Church is going to take Joseph Smith's Bible and they're going to hide it and we're not going to see it again. And the response to that question is, as part of the Joseph Smith Papers Project, the Community of Christ already allowed the LDS Church to post those documents as part of the Joseph Smith Papers. So my understanding is, but I'm not sure, all of those documents have been already digitized and are available through the Joseph Smith Papers website. And, I know the LDS Church has kind of hidden some documents over the years and it's given it a bad reputation. But I know Richard Turley personally, he's like, we're trying to get everything out there, and not just so you have to go to the church history library in Salt Lake City, but we're putting it on the internet so you don't have to travel to Salt Lake City. And so, Ryan, I can't completely answer your question with 100% confidence, but I do believe that most of those documents are available. And that leads me to another question that I got from a listener. Let me see here if I can find it, because it was emailed to me. Will the LDS Church now make Joseph Smith translation materials fully accessible now that they are the sole owners? So I know that in the past, in 81, the LDS Church produced a new version of the King James Bible and the Book of Mormon, and they added a lot of cross-references. With regards to the Bible, they got some access to what we call the Joseph Smith translation. And so the King James Bible is just as it was in 1611 when King James published it. But the 1981, I think that's the right year, edition of the Bible, we have footnotes, and if it's a short change where Joseph just changed a few words or whatever, that's in the footnotes at the bottom of the page that you can read. Some of the longer things, like Joseph Smith Matthew, were added to the Pearl of Great Price. So the question is a good one. Will the LDS, kind of the way I would rephrase the question, will the LDS Church produce its own inspired version of the Bible? I can't answer that. I'm not a member of the people who make that decision. So it's a good question. Hopefully I'll see Kyle McKay at the Mormon History Association coming up in June. And by the way, speaking of Mormon History Association, today is the last day to sign up for your early bird special. So don't wait past today, March 15th. If you wait past midnight, you're not going to get the reduced deal. And I guess I can announce this because I saw the program. I am going to be speaking, or I'm going to be part of a panel at Mormon History Association. And I think it's on the first day, the first session. And so me, Steve Pineacre from Mormon Book Reviews, Chris and Christine Blythe, who have their own podcast with Angels and Seer Stones, I think it's called. And then Rosalind Welch, who's been a guest recently on Gospel Tangents. I didn't realize I would have asked her more. She's doing the Neil A. Maxwell podcast. And so we're going to talk about just Mormon history podcasting. And I haven't prepared anything, so hopefully they let me know if I need to. But so I'll be at MHA, and so sign up today to get the good deal on that. And so here, I'll pull up this other question here. This is from Schwalbera. I don't know if that's how you say it, but that's how I say it. Our German listener here. Are COC faithful encouraged to pay tithing on their income or increase? Gosh, I just interviewed Brittany and we didn't talk about tithing. But I'm pretty sure it's way more flexible than it is in the LDS Church. Oh, actually, Deb, I think, has an answer there. Deb Luce from Iowa, the evangelist there. We pay tithing, however, it is no longer the 10%. They now consider it giving it to our true capacity, as some people can give more than 10% while others struggle to make that mark. So thank you, Deb. Thank you for the answer there. That was awesome. Let's see. Did I finish answering that question about, let's see here. The other part of the question, researchers of the JST are aware that the LDS Bible has incomplete selections from the JST, and some significant Joseph Smith changes are not included in the LDS Bible, Joseph Smith translation footnotes and notes. So much related to the Joseph Smith translation is now available via the Joseph Smith Papers Project. Would you happen to know if this will be complete now? So I think the answer to that question is too early to tell. It wouldn't surprise me. The 1981 edition of the Scriptures is now over 40 years old, and I could see the church saying, now that we have this and we have rights to publish it, let's do it, because copyright only lasts 70 years in the United States. So I could see that happening, but I'm not aware of anything either official or unofficial. Just too early to tell. But yeah, I could see that happening for sure. Corey Heidelbaugh, who is a Patreon member and watches on YouTube. Thank you, Corey. I love the live stream idea. It's nice to hear from you more. I've been planning to visit Nauvoo this summer. One thing I was interested in seeing was the different ways the LDS and the COC presented the historical sites. I wonder if you could speak on that today on the live stream. And so that's a really good question. I kind of covered part of this last week, and maybe I should pull up that statement because, to be honest, was it Gary Boatwright? I think he was the one. Let me pull this up here on Facebook. There's been a lot of concern that people are familiar with the LDS approach to sites. They've always been very missionary minded and very proselytizing. Is this the right one? How are we not Facebook friends? I need to add him as a friend. And so one of the things that Gary said back on March 6th was, a lot of people are like, oh, the LDS Church is going to screw everything up. They're not going to focus on the history. It's going to be all missionary minded. But about 5 years ago, before COVID, the LDS Church has moved a lot of these historic sites. Here, I'm going to try to read this. Let's see. It's hard to read and talk at the same time. I don't think that's the same one that I remember reading. But at any rate, yeah. Basically, about 5 years ago, the LDS Church they still have missionaries staff the sites. But I will tell you this, the only church site that I've visited in the last 5 years, LDS church site, was the Brigham Young home in St. George, which was cool. I was there with Matt Harris, and so I got a really cool thing with one of the missionaries, and he gave us a cool tour, and it was not as proselytizing as either I or Matt were expecting because we were used to the old ways. And so it's hard for me to answer, Corey, but typically maybe I'll say how it was in the past. The LDS, they would bear testimony, and like I can think of Carthage, like Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith died here, and I bear my testimony that Joseph's a prophet and that sort of a thing, and you can learn more, put your name on a card or whatever. So I think that's gone, and there is a bigger focus on the history now. But I mean, COVID made all of us not travel. Oh, Brittany's on. Thank you, Brittany. COVID has made us all not travel. And so we all remember 5 years ago. We don't remember what it is today. And so I think it's going to be better. That change was made way before. But, there is this 15-year agreement at least. For the next 15 years, it's going to be more like Community of Christ, more historical. And so that's all I know. So I can't answer any better than that. So let's see here. We've got another question here. Do you recall a time when the COC or perhaps the NRLDS Church attempted to sell the Kirtland Temple to us in the past? I seem to recall that it was for a very steep price and our leaders. So I don't know. I mentioned last week when Brigham Young left Nauvoo that he tried to sell the Nauvoo temple. So it's not the first time a temple has been sold. Brigham Young also tried to sell the Kirtland Temple back in 1844, 45, 46, in that time frame. And I know that with Joseph Smith being highly entangled in his personal finances and church finances, and he was also dealing with some laws I just learned. I think in Ohio, a church could only own a certain amount of property. And so that relates to why some of it was personal and some of it was church property, which Joseph was trying to get around some of these laws. And so, Alan, I'm not aware of the Community of Christ ever attempting to sell the temple. Maybe it happened, but I'm not aware of it. So if you have any more, I'm not interested, or I don't know about that. So Summer Lake has another question here. Oh, actually, let me finish up because I didn't understand. So Alan's statement went into, I seem to recall that it was for a very steep price, and our leaders, every time I click on this, it moves, told them the temple had fulfilled its mission. Maybe this is a rumor. I would chalk it up to probably being a rumor. So, yeah, now that makes more sense. I know there were a lot of rumors. There was a rumor that I had never heard of, was that, in those years from, let's say, 1840, because Joseph Smith fled in 1837 to Missouri. And so between 1837 and 1860, the temple wasn't very well maintained. There was a rumor that people were putting their sheep in there, and in these, because they were using the, because if you go in the Kirtland temple, they have these like boxes where people sit, and they look kind of like sheep pens. I'd never heard this story before, but there was a rumor that people were storing their sheep in the temple. And I remember, was it Locke Mackay? I think I talked to him, and he said, it's probably possible that the doors were open and then maybe a wild animal walked in. But if the temple actually had a bunch of animals in there, you would have seen urine and feces damage in the floorboards, and they're not there. So that's another one of those rumors that somebody made up. And it was funny because I had never heard the rumor until somebody, and it was a Restoration Church member. It wasn't somebody from the LDS Church, because I'd never heard that story before. But anyway, that was a false rumor. Maybe an animal wandered in because the door was open, but nobody stored sheep there. So Brittany says, hi, glad you're still talking about this. Thanks, Brittany. Let's see here. Oh, I guess I didn't need to show that one. Run, shoot, ski. Let's see here. What percent of Nauvoo does the church, I assume that means the LDS Church, own now? 80%. I think it's 100, because, and that maybe I should start showing some pictures here. I wonder if there are plans for it beyond just being a historic Mormon town. I would guess not, but let's I have some photos that I wanted to share, and I think that's a good, and I wanted to talk about this anyway. I just got to figure out how to share them here. Let's see. Okay, whoops, I opened it up twice. Let me share my screen here. Present. And one of these days I'm going to be organized, and I'm going to, there we go, create a PowerPoint. But right now, these are just pictures. So this building, the Red Brick Store, of course, that's my friend Steve Pineacre there. We're standing in front of the Red Brick Store, one of the coolest signs that the Community of Christ owned. You can see the different logo you'll see the LDS Church logo coming up here, but this is me and Steve standing in front of the Red Brick Store. It's where I purchased my first Joseph Smith for President shirt, which I have coming up here. And I just think the Red Brick Store is very cool. Of course, in the the bottom floor was a store. You can still buy some root beer um, in brown bottles, and well, I don't know. LDS Church owns it now, but you could, and so I don't. Hopefully, that won't change. We'll see. But the upper rooms of the red brick store is where Joseph Smith taught the endowment to leaders like Brigham Young and some of the early apostles before the Nauvoo temple was completed. And so I know, I mean, I guess this speaks to one of the differences. I can't remember if they talked about that uh, for the Community of Christ guides, but uh, I'm sure that will become an emphasis once the LDS Church reopens it up to the public. So I'm sure they're doing a lot of stuff. So this is supposed to open up in about 10 days to the public. And so you guys will be able to see that. There's my friend Locke Mackay, apostle for the Community of Christ, there in the middle, with me and Steve. This is a tent to the left of the screen was Paul DeBarth's dig site for the Times and Seasons building. You can see over Steve and Locke's shoulder there in the back. That's the LDS side, and I'll show some pictures from the LDS side. It's definitely more developed than the Community of Christ side of Nauvoo, but my understanding is, and I wish I had more pictures from the dig site. I think I've got some in some of my videos, but couldn't find them quickly. And so anyway, I know that Paul was doing some excavations. He was finding some type. I didn't know until I talked to Paul that there were, I think he has an argument with Locke on whether there were 4 or 5 different locations for the Times and Seasons buildings. And the one that Paul's working on is tiny. It's like 400 or 500 square feet, probably. It's just tiny. And I wish I had pictures, but that's just to the left of the screen, behind me, basically. But I couldn't find the pictures there. Of course, there's the Nauvoo temple. And, you know, that's been closed to the public, and it's been dedicated for LDS temple ordinances. A lot of people were concerned that that was going to happen with Kirtland. I don't think so. I mean, for 15 years, we know the LDS Church isn't going to really touch it too much. But and oh, by the way, the LDS Church just renovated the Manti Temple, and in fact, I think yesterday or today was the first day it's been reopened to the public. And so if you can make it out to Manti, there's some amazing paintings from Minerva Teichert that were saved. And the LDS Church is going to build a new temple in the next town over, which is Ephraim, Utah. They're probably only 20 minutes apart, I'm guessing, maybe a half hour. But the outside of the Nauvoo temple has been restored. The one thing that I was really sad, you can see the angel Moroni on top. The original Nauvoo temple had a kind of a weather vane where it was a flying angel that would change with the direction of the wind, which I personally would have loved. But President Hinckley said he liked the standing Moroni better than the flying angel. So that's kind of a bummer to me. But otherwise, you know, this was, the outside is very, they tried very hard to make it look exactly like the original Nauvoo temple. And I will say, when it was opened, was it 2002? I think I attended the open house. And, you know, for those who are LDS, it did feel like trying to convert the Nauvoo temple to modern LDS standards. It felt like they were shoving too many things in there. I believe that originally the Nauvoo temple, like the Kirtland temple, and it's bigger, by the way, than Kirtland, had two main floors, two assembly floors. So check out my interview with David Hall to know what the original Nauvoo temple and the original, well, you guys can still see what Kirtland looks like with the two floors on top of each other. That's a fun interview, and you'll have a better idea of what the original Nauvoo temple was like. So it was kind of, and I will also mention John Hamer. I know I've got some slides from his interview where he talks about how the temples changed from Kirtland to Nauvoo to Salt Lake, and where Kirtland, Nauvoo, and even Salt Lake had some administrative functions, and I'm sure there's still going to be an assembly room. I can't wait until the Salt Lake Temple opens. I know that's going to be huge because they'll still have the assembly room, and I'm sure that the general authorities still meet there weekly in the Salt Lake. Well, I mean, they don't now. I think they had to create something in the Joseph Smith building while the temple was being renovated. So anyway, these are some statues there at the Nauvoo Temple. I remember hanging out with Jeff McCullough, and he and Steve did an interview there. But this is the Community of Christ side of Nauvoo that was recently sold to the LDS Church. And so this is the sign there for the Joseph and Hiram Smith house. Now, I am a little confused because this is on the Smith property, and I have heard, that this was not part of the sale, but I'm not 100% on that. So, but at any rate, we have the graves of Hiram, Joseph, and Emma. There has been a question about whether Emma is buried, next to Joseph or to Hiram. One of these days, I need to get an interview on an expert on how many times they buried Joseph and Hiram. It's kind of crazy because the original funeral was they just put sand in the caskets because they were afraid of grave robbers that would dig up Joseph and Hiram's grave and desecrate them. And so they were originally stored in the basement of the Nauvoo. Was it the Nauvoo house or the mansion house? One of those two. And anyway, they got moved 3 or 4 times, but this is the current final resting place. And I know there's been some debate on, and I've heard compelling cases on both sides. You know, Joseph was shot in the face, and so you would expect damage, but both of Joseph and Hiram's skulls in the most recent examination, which I think was in the 1950s, show a lot of damage to the skulls. And so some people have made the case that the graves were switched and that this is really Hiram and this is really Joseph. I've heard experts argue, and I believe Locke says that he thinks that they're swapped, but I've heard other people say that they think they're correctly labeled. So I don't know. But there's definitely a dispute about who Emma is buried next to. So some people think she's buried next to Hiram, but she's labeled next to Joseph. So anyway, this is inside the Joseph Smith house. And I know it's a little out of focus. I apologize for that. But this is, was what it looked like and what you guys will be seeing here in a few weeks inside. Of course, Community of Christ has added some electricity, which obviously Joseph and Emma didn't get. But even then, it's still a pretty dark room. You can also see a modern fire extinguisher there and some other little things. But it's really interesting to see the workmanship that Joseph and Emma's house would have been. And so here's the dining area. And of course, This is our best guess as to what it looked like. May not have looked exactly like this, but this is period furniture and that sort of a thing. So this is a spinning wheel that Emma likely would have used. I don't know that any of this furniture would be original, but it's just kind of a replica furniture that dates to the time period. So interesting to see the crib you can see in the back, but even the small bed there. A lot of times you don't think about this, but they would sleep on straw. They didn't have the nice mattresses that we have. And so interesting to see how small the beds were. This is another bedroom. I'm not sure why that chest of drawers is in front of what looks like a door, but obviously that's probably in the wrong place. This is outside the Smith homestead. You can see the well there on the left. And so it's at 935 South. I want to say Chillicothe, but I don't know if that's the right street. I think it is, but I'm sure that sign will be changed out soon with LDS signage. So me and Steve and Locke also went to the mansion house, and so you can see that there. I'm trying to remember where I took this picture. I don't know why I took it, but there was something there. And this is really out of focus, but this is the ladies' parlor. Those paintings, these are the Rogers paintings, I believe, although I'm not an art expert, so I might have that wrong, but I believe those are the Rogers paintings. And those were part of the sale. And so those are in LDS Church hands now. And just another view of the same room there. It was interesting to see they've got these Joseph Smith for president, General Joseph Smith, with Vice President Sidney Rigdon. So they've tried to recreate some of the flyers that they might have had. I'm trying to remember. I couldn't read the plaque. I believe this is the Maudsley paintings of Joseph and Emma. And I know people have used both the Maudsley painting and the Rogers painting. There was the recent photograph of Joseph Smith, and people have tried to use these paintings to say, yes, it's Joseph Smith, no, it's Hiram, or whatever. But anyway, these are the Maudsley paintings, and I believe they were part of the sale as well. This is Joseph and Emma's bedroom, which is cool. And then they've got a model of what it would have looked like. I think one of the wings is missing, and but this is what it was a lot bigger back in the day. And so, will the LDS Church rebuild it like it was? It's who knows, but it wouldn't surprise me. It's interesting to see how many chimneys they had. 1, 2, 3, 4. They didn't have central heating, so everybody had to have their own fireplace to stay warm in the winter. So that's kind of interesting. So this is the printing office for the Times and Seasons. This is on the LDS side of Nauvoo. And so I want to say this is the third or the fourth printing office. If you'll notice, or I'll try to zoom in here, it says the Times and Seasons and the Nauvoo Neighbor. The LDS Church, the name of the Nauvoo Neighbor was the Wasp, and William Smith was the editor of the Wasp, and he liked to sting his enemies. And he had a lot of biting commentary. But that was also in this building. The LDS Church typically doesn't like, and so when they kicked William out as editor of the Wasp, it became the Nauvoo Neighbor. I think John Taylor was the editor to be more, nicer than William was. William was quite pugnacious. So, but this is on the LDS side. It kind of gives you an idea of what, the LDS Church can do with some of these buildings. This is, I can't remember, John Taylor's home. So that's a nice big home. Also on the LDS side. So this still owned by the LDS Church and didn't change hands. This is the Cultural Hall. I believe some of the Masonic, if I remember right, Masonic temple ceremonies were done here as well. Close up, and you can see the logo for the LDS Church, and I'm sure they'll change the signage to match. So this was not part of the sale. So Community of Christ members can be grateful for this. This is the Nauvoo campground, which is a very relatively inexpensive place to stay. So Steve and I didn't have a hotel, and they offered us to sleep there in the lodge, which was great. It was awesome. So this is just some more pictures of the campground. So once again, this is still owned by the Community of Christ, but I would highly recommend that if you want a relatively cheap place to stay, go there. I think they have tent sites, but I'm not much of a camper. I hate camping. So it's nice to sleep in a bed. And there's what do they call that? The seal for the Community of Christ and the emphasis of peace, and that the lamb will lay down with the lion. So that's kind of a cool symbol. This is inside the lodge. They have a large assembly hall. And so I know Steve had advertised, hey, come meet us in Nauvoo. And nobody did. It was me, Jeff, Steve, Paul DeBarth. I don't think Paul's wife was there, and I think there was one other person. If you were there and I forgot, I'm sorry. And so we just sat here and talked, and it was fun. So a view out. I think this was the back door of my room, if I remember right. So you can see the beautiful scenery there on the banks of the Mississippi. I don't remember why this bell was here, but it was cool. And I've got my Joseph Smith for President shirt. So you can buy that or you could buy it at the Red Brick store. Hopefully you can still buy some of those. I'm trying to remember. It seems like this is also at the campground, but I believe that this was a grave that's been overgrown. I can't remember if that's correct. And then, of course, the Mississippi River. Obviously, I'm in my car here, but the road to Nauvoo goes right along the Mississippi. I should point out that the water level today is much higher than it was in Joseph Smith's day because they've got the dam in Keokuk, and so it looks like a lake, but it's a river. I mean, it's kind of a lake river because it's all part of the Mississippi. But they dammed that up because in Joseph Smith's day, there were really terrible rapids in Nauvoo. And so if a boat needed to be rescued, that's why Emma started the Relief Society. It was to relieve the boats. And a lot of times boats would stop just north of Nauvoo. They would offload all of the goods around the rapids, and then they would get a second boat, and that boat would continue the journey on. So the river definitely looks way different today because of the dam in Keokuk, and so it's a lot higher, and so you can't see those rapids that were there in Joseph Smith's day. So anyway, that's all my pictures that I have that I could find for Nauvoo. So yes, and let's see. I'm trying to catch up here. So Raccoon Man says, Brigham Young said something to the effect that it wasn't super important to get the Kirtland Temple back because it had fulfilled its purpose, but there was no offer from the Community of Christ or LDS Church. So I think that was the answer to somebody else's question. And that sounds right to me. I don't have anything to add on that. So Deb Luce heard, so this is a rumor, that the Red Brick store will no longer be a store like it is now, but she doesn't remember if that was an official statement. And I like what Summer said here, Summer Lake. If you're watching live, put a like. Sure. And Brittany said, yes, we still own the campground. And she just updated the frequently asked questions to clarify that. And I will just add on top of that, I know at the Q&A, and I don't remember if this got answered a couple of nights ago. I think the question was something to the effect of, did we have to sell the visitor centers in Kirtland and Nauvoo because there is a Community of Christ visitor center at both sites? And I don't know that they had to, but they did. So I'm sure I shouldn't laugh. That's another big loss. Best time of year to visit Nauvoo. That's a good question because the summers are very hot and muggy. And the springs are very wet and muddy. And so when do you go if it's not summer or spring? The winters are cold and that humid cold. It's really tough. So I would probably suggest late spring before it gets too hot. If you go early spring, because no, I'm getting this mixed up with Independence because Independence is going to be, well, it's just down the river. So I would argue both with that. Alan Blodgett says fall, and that's probably good. I've never been in the fall, but that's probably good. Deb says late May or mid-June or the fall. So yeah, probably fall. I've never been in the fall, so that's probably good. And then Deb, I'm not sure. You said nobody, but I don't know. I said something, but I don't know what I said. So maybe you can clarify what I said that was wrong statement there. So, all right. Well, we're an hour in. I think I've answered all the questions. Thank you all for listening in. I've showed you my photos. We talked about the Q&A for the Community of Christ. Nobody. Oh, I knew that there was somebody I was forgetting. So the funniest thing, nobody went to meet you and Steve. So that's true in the lodge because we were meeting in the lodge and Deb was on her way. And that's right. But we didn't meet you in the lodge. And we thought it would be easier since Deb lives in Iowa across the river. Did we meet in Keokuk? I can't remember, but we thought, well, we'll go to Iowa to make it easier for Deb, but it made it harder. And so that's right. So we met at a Mexican restaurant in Iowa. I'm sorry, Deb, but we didn't meet in that lodge. That's what I meant. Nobody else, but you did meet us for dinner after, and I apologize for forgetting that. So, all right. And we have pictures, but I guess I didn't pull them up. Here, maybe I'll pull them up really quick. See if I can find my Amazon photos to show that Deb did show up. It just wasn't. It was in Iowa rather than Illinois. I have more Iowa photos than I thought. Here we go. I got to figure out how to share again. Is this the right one? I hope this is the right one. Nope, it wasn't. Oh, it's right here. Try this one more time. Oh, it really does help to have two monitors. This is hard. Nope. Sorry, I apologize for this. Here we go. I think. There we go. That's working. So proof that Deb showed up. She's there in the back with me and Steve and Paul and his wife, Rena, who passed away about a year ago, I think. And so, yes, she did show up, just in Iowa rather than Missouri. So thanks, Deb. All right. Well, let me just check, see if there's any more things. All right. Well, I'll let you guys go. Thanks again. And let me know if you have any topics you want me to cover next week. It was super fun talking to Brittany. I will say, Brittany, some of my church members are jerks, and I'm sorry. I will say I have so many friends in the community of Christ now, and it is still surprising to me when LDS people get very defensive and like, their church is wrong about this, and they're all woke and progressive and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, do you really not watch my channel? Because I'm here to be friends with my community of Christ friends. They don't believe the same way I do, and that is perfectly fine. I don't need to defend my beliefs to them or to denigrate their beliefs. But anyway, I know, Brittany, you still have to put up with that, and I'm sorry. But I'm trying to put a stop to it. So maybe I'll put that up there. Thank you, Donnie. I have been in both the LDS and our LDS community of Christ. There are jerks in both churches. Probably true. So, and thank you, Deb. Says we love our LDS cousins, and I love my community of Christ cousins. So, thanks a lot. And with that, we'll end the stream. And once again, send me a note or a Facebook comment or YouTube comment here. Let me know what you want to talk about next week. I will tell you that next week, hopefully you saw my preview, I've got Arish Ben Sassi from Tunisia that she believes that ancient Phoenicians traveled to America. She's not a member of our church. I can't remember if she's Muslim or Jewish, one of those two. I think she's Muslim, but I can't remember. So anyway, I'm editing that now, and that's what we have for next week. So thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thanks.